People often speak to me of the experience of emptiness in their lives. Ironically, they are people whose lives are overcrowded, filled with plans, responsibilities, anxieties, and fears. They're uncomfortable with silence. It makes them feel helpless. So they fill their silence with conversation and their prayers with words. They never stop to pause or rest, for to do so would be wasting time, of which they never seem to have enough of. Still, despite all they have and do and say, they feel empty inside. Their emptiness is a painful reality that serves no purpose in their lives. The question we have to ask ourselves is, can anyone whose life is full of clutter and demands ever acquire this type of emptiness that gives purpose and meaning to their life? Yes. If a bird's nest is filled with rubbish, it can be emptied. If a freshwater pond is clogged with silt and dirt, it can be extracted. If a person is distracted by trifling things in their life, it can be discarded. Anyone who has crowded emptiness out of their minds and silence out of their souls can restore it. At least they can allow God to restore it by asking God to do so. But what's important is to realize that it doesn't happen all at once. It's a process whereby over and over again we gradually work at emptying out from our lives all that we know to be useless and unnecessary. We must sift and sort out everything that is not essential and that fills up space and takes away the silence from us. And gradually, as this sacred space begins to take shape in us, we will learn what sort of purpose God has for us and in what way we are to fulfill the task of bearing Christ in our lives and for others. Take Mary, our mother, as an example. Caryll Houselander, in her book, The Reed of God, paints for us a beautiful description of the various ways the virgin emptiness of Mary received the love of God into her life. She describes her as a tiny reed. The reed grows by the streams. It is the simplest of things, but the reed has to be cut with a sharp knife, and then it's hollowed out, and the stops, the holes, must be cut into it. This tiny reed must be shaped and pierced before it can begin to utter the shepherd's song and become a flute. The reed has the narrowest emptiness in the world, but it has the capacity to utter infinite music. Caryll Houselander describes Mary as that tiny reed whose pure heart enabled the love of God to pipe a shepherd's song. She goes on to speak of her as a chalice. Now we know a chalice is made of gold, and gold must be gathered from the water and the mud, and it has to be hewn from the rock. Then it must be beaten by countless little blows that give the chalice of sacrifice its fitting beauty. Again, Mary's virginal womb was the chalice into which the purest water of humanity was to be poured, mingled with wine, changed to the crimson blood of love, and lifted up in sacrifice. And finally, Caryll Houselander refers to Mary as the empty nest. The twigs and fluff and leaves of a bird's nest are brought from all sorts of places. It is the shape of the mother bird's breast that molds the nest to its inviting roundness. Mary's obedience to the will of God was the warm nest that received the Holy Spirit. And so if we apply these images to ourselves, the same can happen to us. We may be formed by the knife, pared down to the minimum of our own being, or we may be shaped by a succession of strokes, blows from the gold beater's hammer, or we may be shaped for our purpose by the love and tender devotion of those who love us. But no matter how we are fashioned, each of us, when we take the time to clear away the rubble, even for a day, even for a moment, can ask the Holy Spirit to show us the way that Christ wills to manifest himself through our lives. So you can ask yourself, does Jesus ask to be sung like a reed, to be uttered as the word? Does he ask to be sacrificed in you like a chalice, to be lifted up so that others might be drawn to him through you? Does he ask to be fostered and swaddled and cherished like a baby in its nest, a little unfledged bird in the human heart? As always, this all depends on grace. With the help of God's grace, we can, like Mary, trust God's plan. We can put aside any doubts that may entertain us regarding our unworthiness for such a task. We simply have to accept the fact that this is who we are at this very moment. Who we are is who we are. And who we are is what God intends to use as the material by which he will form and fashion in us an emptiness which can only be filled by God, and which God even now is waiting to fill.